Okay, look, let's just be real for a minute. The story I'm about to tell you, it's not neat and it's not pretty. It's complicated, messy, and it's something I never ever thought I'd be telling anyone, let alone a faceless audience on the internet. But it's eating me alive. The silence is a poison, and I guess I just need to get it out. To put it out there in the world and see if it feels any more real or any less monstrous. So here it is. My confession. My name is Laura. I'm 47, divorced, and I have one son. For the past 5 years, my life has felt like a worn-out record stuck on a scratchy repeating groove. I'm a night shift nurse in the ICU. It's the kind of job where you see things that sandblast your soul, things that make you question the very fabric of life and death. You see families torn apart by a single cruel moment of fate. You see the human body's incredible fragility and its stubborn, baffling resilience. And after a while, you get used to it. You build a wall inside yourself, a professional barrier made of exhaustion and gallows humor. That wall, unfortunately, doesn't come down when I clock out. My life outside of work is a ghost of what it used to be. I go to work. I come home to an empty house that still feels too big. I try to force myself to sleep while the sun is shining my body, screaming that this is wrong. And then I wake up, chug coffee and do it all over again. 5 nights a week. It's a routine that has hollowed me out, leaving a strange echoing emptiness. The woman I used to be, the one who laughed easily, who had hobbies, who felt desirable, she's a ghost too. But there's one thing, one small absurd thing that keeps me from completely losing my mind. Bowling. Seriously. I know it sounds like something your grandma does with her bridge club, but I love it. The slick polished wood of the lane, the satisfying explosive crack of the ball hitting the pins, the focus it requires narrowing my entire world down to a single achievable goal. It's my escape. I joined a league last year just to force myself out of the house. And it turned out I was actually pretty decent. Good, even good enough to qualify for a real honest-to-goodness tournament 3 hours away. I was ecstatic for months. I practiced staying late after my league nights, working on my hook, my release. It felt like a tiny piece of my old life, the life before the divorce, before the loneliness set in, was coming back. But then reality, as it always does, hit me like a ton of bricks. Who was going to watch my son Josh? Josh is 16. And to say he has a rebellious streak is like saying the ocean is a little damp. He's a good kid deep down, but he's angry about the divorce, angry about our shoebox apartment, angry at the world. And he expresses that anger in ways that are destructive. The last time I left him alone for a weekend, I came home to find his buddy's pickup truck halfway through my garage door. They were testing its structural integrity, apparently. So I did what I always do. I called my ex-husband Mark, but of course fate, or maybe just Murphy's Law, had other plans. "Can't, Laura," he'd said over a crackly line. "Got guard duty that weekend, you know how it is." I did know the army had always come first. It's why we weren't married anymore. So I was stuck. I couldn't miss this tournament. It meant too much. It was proof that I was more than just a tired nurse and a failed wife, but I couldn't leave Josh home alone. So I did the only thing a responsible, if deeply exasperated mother could do. I packed us both up, booked a hotel room with 2 queen beds and an indoor pool, and prayed for a miracle. Or at least for a weekend without any property damage. The drive there was a study in awkward silence. Josh sat slumped in the passenger seat, headphones on, the thumping bass of some incomprehensible rap song bleeding out. I tried to make conversation, pointing out landmarks, asking about school. All I got were one-word answers and grunts. It was like driving with a hostile sullen stranger who just happened to wear my son's face. The hotel was a standard mid-range affair, clean beige and smelling faintly of chlorine and stale coffee. The forced intimacy of the single room was immediately palpable. 2 beds a few feet apart, there was nowhere to hide from each other. As Josh threw his bag onto his bed and immediately started scrolling through his phone, I looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't a little boy anymore. His shoulders were broadening, a smudge of dark hair was appearing on his upper lip. He was on the cusp of manhood, and it hit me with a sudden sharp pang that I barely knew the person he was becoming. The next morning I woke up feeling a little more optimistic. I stretched the knots in my back from the drive protesting and went to wake Josh. He was still sound asleep, curled up under the covers, looking younger and more vulnerable than he had in years. I shook him gently. "Breakfast?" I asked. He mumbled something about pancakes, so I knew he was at least semi-conscious. We went down to the hotel restaurant, a buffet of rubbery eggs, crispy bacon, and mini muffins that were somehow always dry. Josh loaded his plate with a mountain of pancakes and drowned them in syrup while I opted for a sensible omelette. We ate in a comfortable silence, the first we'd shared in a long time. It was nice. After breakfast, I asked if there was anything he wanted to do before I had to head back to the bowling alley for the afternoon session. He perked up immediately. "There's a mall nearby," he said, his eyes showing the first spark of enthusiasm I'd seen all weekend. "They have a GameStop. I've been looking for this old game, and they might have it." I'm not a fan of malls, they're loud, crowded, and always make me feel like I'm in a consumerist maze. But Josh so rarely asks for anything, and I was desperate to maintain this fragile truce between us. So I agreed. We drove to the mall, and he led me straight to GameStop. He found the game he was looking for, a used game from a decade ago that was inexplicably selling for nearly $60. I couldn't believe it. But his face was lit up with such genuine, unadulterated excitement that I just sighed, pulled out my wallet, and paid for it. He grinned at me, a real happy grin that reached his eyes, and for a moment the $60 felt like a bargain. We spent a few more hours wandering around, window shopping, people watching. We actually talked. He told me about his friends, about a girl he liked, about his frustrations with a history teacher. I told him stories about what I was like at his age. It was the most we'd connected in years. That night when I went back to the bowling alley, I felt good. I was rested, I'd spent real time with my son, and I was ready to bowl my best. But as it turns out, I bowl better when I'm tired and stressed. The relaxation had dulled my edge. I went from second place all the way down to fifth. It was a crushing disappointment. All those months of practice, all that hope evaporated under the fluorescent lights of the alley. I managed to put on a brave face, especially when one of the girls from my home league, Sarah, actually won the whole tournament. I was genuinely happy for her. She'd worked hard, and she deserved it. After the awards ceremony, a bunch of the bowlers decided to go out and celebrate. They invited me, and I hesitated for a second, thinking of Josh back at the hotel. But the bar was just across the street, a perfect stumble-away distance. I needed to wash away the taste of my own failure. I told them I'd come as long as I didn't have to drive. The bar was loud and cheerful. I'm not a big drinker, but that night I decided to indulge. One glass of wine turned into 2, then 3. I lost count. We laughed, we toasted Sarah's win, we told exaggerated stories of our best and worst games. For a few hours, I wasn't a tired nurse or a disappointed mother. I was just Laura, one of the girls having a good time, I think. I finally stumbled back to the hotel around 1:30 in the morning. The world had a soft, fuzzy edge to it. I was a little tipsy, my head light, but I was also happy and relaxed. I fumbled with the keycard, opened the door to our room and saw Josh asleep in his bed, the TV still on, casting a flickering blue light across his face. He looked so peaceful. I smiled, went to the bathroom, changed into my pajamas and climbed into my own bed. The room wasn't exactly spinning, but it felt like it was gently rocking like a calm sea. I lay my head on the pillow, pulled the covers up, and tried to focus on the old action movie playing on the TV. But for some reason my mind wouldn't shut off. I was just lying there thinking about the tournament, about Josh, about the vast, empty expanse of my life. The alcohol had peeled back a layer, leaving my nerves raw and exposed. I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, the clock on the cable box read 3:17 a.m. It was the dead of night, that strange, silent hour when the world seems to hold its breath. And then I heard it. A sound from the other bed. A soft, rhythmic rustling of sheets. I peeked over at him. In the shifting blue light from the TV, I could see his blanket moving. A slow, steady, up and down motion. My first thought was, well, it's the natural thought for any parent of a teenage son, isn't it? He was taking care of business. He was moving slowly, trying to be quiet, probably thinking I was sound asleep. And my first reaction was a wave of maternal awkwardness. I should pretend to be asleep all over, give him his privacy. That was the normal, sane, motherly thing to do. But I didn't. I just lay there perfectly still, and watched. And this is the part of the story where things get difficult. Because the longer I watch, the more a new feeling began to unspool inside me. Something completely alien and deeply disturbing. I became intrigued. I know how weird that sounds. I know how wrong it sounds. But it's the truth. And as I lay there listening to the soft sounds, watching the movement of the blanket, I started to feel a strange coiling heat deep in my belly. A slow, creeping sense of arousal. My mind was screaming at me. This is your son. This is sick. What is wrong with you? But the wine had bulldozed my inhibitions, and my body, so long neglected and dormant, was responding to the raw, forbidden intimacy of the moment. It was the taboo itself that was intoxicating. Knowing what he was doing just a few feet away from me in the secret dark. It was a feeling so far outside the bounds of my monotonous life that it was utterly, terrifyingly thrilling. After about 10 minutes of this internal war, I was, well, let's just say I was feeling things I hadn't felt in a very, very long time. I kept wondering, is he ever going to finish? I guess it was the wine, or the loneliness, or the stinging disappointment of the tournament. Maybe it was all of it, a perfect storm of vulnerability and bad judgment. But I couldn't take it anymore. The silence, the waiting, the electric tension in the room. In a moment of what I can only describe as temporary insanity, I blurted it out, my voice a thick, unfamiliar croak in the quiet room. Do you need any help with that? The words hung in the air, instantly regrettable, impossibly real. A part of my brain was already scrambling for an out. If he says no, or what? I'll just pretend I was talking in my sleep. A drunken dream. It was a flimsy, pathetic plan, but it was all I had. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. The rustling stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, absolute. And then a voice from the other bed, quiet but clear. Yes. This is the moment where the story breaks. Where everything you think you know about yourself, about morality, about the lines that should never be crossed, it all shatters. What would you do? This is not a rhetorical question. I want you to really think about it. If you were in this dark room filled with loneliness and wine and this impossible situation, what would your next move be? Let me know in the comments, because I'm still trying to understand my own. And if this story is already getting under your skin, please hit that like button. It tells me that you're willing to walk into the dark with me. That single word yes, it wasn't an accusation. It wasn't shocked. It was an acceptance. A quiet, undeniable truth. It was like a switch had been flipped in the universe. The what-ifs and the should-haves and the panicked voice of my conscience, they all faded away, replaced by a strange, chilling sense of inevitability. I felt as if I were watching myself from a distance, a spectator in the unfolding drama of my own life. A strange detachment settled over me, a sense of unreality. It was as if I was stepping out of my body, leaving behind the constraints of morality and societal expectation, leaving behind the woman who was a mother, a nurse, a bowler. I stood up. My legs felt strangely numb, disconnected from my brain, moving on their own accord. I walked the few steps towards his bed. The room was bathed in the soft, shifting glow of the TV, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the walls like demons. I stopped at the edge of his bed, my heart pounding a frantic drumbeat against the silence. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, a palpable warmth that seemed to pull me closer. I hesitated for just a moment, my hand hovering over the edge of the blanket, a silent question hanging in the charged air. Then slowly, deliberately, I reached out and pulled the covers down. He lay there, his eyes wide and the dim light fixed on me. They held a mixture of surprise and something else, something I couldn't quite decipher. Arousal, yes, but also a kind of pleading. His hand was still wrapped around himself, a silent testament to the act I had just interrupted. I stood there for a moment, that stretched into an eternity, just looking at him, trying to process what was happening. It was like looking at a stranger who wore my son's face. The boy I had raised, whose diapers I had changed, whose fevers I had soothed, he was gone. In his place was this young man on the precipice of his own sexuality, and I had just crashed headlong into it. It was a strange, dizzying mix of familiarity and utter foreignness, a blurring of the lines between mother and something else. I felt a pull, an almost irresistible urge to touch him, to cross that final sacred line. My fingers were trembling as I reached out and gently took his hand, moving it away. His skin was warm, slightly damp. The sensation sent a shiver racing up my arm and down my spine. Here I whispered, my voice barely audible, husky with a desire I didn't recognize. Let me help you with that. My gaze lowered, my eyes, tracing the lines of his body, the subtle curves and angles that were both intimately familiar and strangely new. I could see the evidence of his arousal, the stark physical changes that marked the transition from boy to man. The air was thick with unspoken desires and forbidden thoughts. I watched as my own hand began to move, my fingers tracing slow, deliberate patterns along his length. The contrast of textures was intoxicating. My own breath quickened, my body responding to the forbidden touch with an intensity that shocked me. I watched as the first glistening pearl of pre-cum appeared at the tip. Without thinking, I leaned in, my tongue darting out to taste it. The salty tang was an electric jolt, a current that shot through my entire nervous system. He jerked slightly at the contact, a soft gasp escaping his lips. "Do you want me to?" I whispered, my voice thick with a need that had completely consumed me. He just nodded, his eyes fixed on mine, a silent, desperate plea in their depths. I lowered my head, my lips brushing against his skin. The scent of him, the taste of him, sent a wave of dizzying heat through me. I wrapped my lips around him, the sensation a shiver of pure, unadulterated pleasure that obliterated every last shred of my conscience. As I moved, I felt his hands in my hair, his fingers tangling, gently pulling. "If you pull," I told him, my voice, a low, husky growl, "you might like what happens." He pulled slightly, and a renewed surge of desire of power shot through me. I squeezed him in return. "Harder," I urged, and he did. These sensations were overwhelming, a storm of pleasure and guilt, of desire and shame. I was being tossed and turned by forces far beyond my control. I felt him tense his body, shuddering as he reached his climax. His release was powerful, a surge of warmth that filled my mouth, a taste that was both a homecoming and a desecration. Afterwards, a stunned, heavy silence fell over the room. We just lay there, our bodies intertwined in the dark, our breaths mingling in the quiet. The air was thick with unspoken emotions, with the crushing weight of what we had just done. We can't make a habit of this," I said, finally, my voice a barely there whisper. I knew it was a lie even as I said it. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to cling to some semblance of normalcy, to pretend we could put this genie back in the bottle. But the words felt empty, hollow, like a promise I knew I couldn't and didn't want to keep. We tried to talk to make sense of the seismic event that had just occurred, but words were inadequate. The emotions were too raw, too complex, too tangled in a web of love and lust and shame. And then, as if drawn by an invisible, irresistible force, we found ourselves moving back towards each other. The desire, far from being sated, was reigniting like a wildfire in a dry forest. He asked me to again, his voice a raw whisper, and I found myself utterly unable to refuse. The guilt was still there, a nagging voice in the back of my mind, but it was drowned out by the overwhelming, all-consuming surge of desire. "Oh my God," I thought, as I felt him harden again, "he's ready again." My mind began to race, tumbling into even darker, more forbidden territories. The lines between mother and son, between right and wrong, were now completely blurred, distorted, almost non-existent. We were caught in a whirlwind, a dance of passion and guilt, a secret that would forever bind us together. There we were, after everything. After all the lines had been crossed and then obliterated, the air in the hotel room was thick, heavy with the weight of our shared secret. I knew in the logical, rational part of my brain, that was still functioning, that what had happened was wrong. Morally, ethically, in every way, a sane society defines it, but the guilt, that heavy, suffocating feeling I expected to crush me, it was fleeting. It would come in waves, washing over me with a cold dread, and then it would recede, leaving behind a strange, almost unsettling sense of anticipation. I kept telling myself this can't happen again. I tried to reason with myself on the long, silent drive home, tried to find some way to reconcile what we'd done with the reality of our relationship. But the truth was the lines had been irrevocably blurred, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't want to redraw them. It was a dark, thrilling secret that pulsed beneath the surface of our now changed lives. The guilt and the shame, they were there lurking in the shadows, but they were overshadowed by a strange, almost addictive sense of power. It was a desire that had been sleeping for decades, and now that it was awake, I didn't know how to put it back to sleep. I knew with a chilling certainty that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The beginning of something different, something complicated, something dangerous, something thrilling. I found myself thinking about other things, other possibilities, other ways to explore this terrifying, newfound dynamic. I started to think about the next time, and what that might look like. I thought of new ways to touch, new ways, to explore, new ways to break every single rule we had ever known. And that's when the truly naughty ideas started to creep in. Ideas that made my heart race, and my skin tingle. Ideas that made me question the very foundation of who I thought I was. So this is my story, my ugly, complicated, thrilling, and shameful truth, and it brings me back to my question for you. What would you do if you found yourself in a situation like this, caught in a whirlwind of forbidden desires with no easy answers? Would you run? Would you try to forget? Or would you explore? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you've made it this far on this journey with me, please subscribe to the channel, because believe me, this story's far from over, from